Hey everyone, I wanted to wait until the weekend was over before posting this. I wanted to make it official that I am back as Superman. And the image you see on this post and what you saw in Black Adam are just a very small taste of things to come.
Welcome back, Superman.
I want to thank you guys most of all. Thank you for your support and thank you for your patience. I promise it will be rewarded. I promise it will be rewarded.
These videos are not for children. If you're a children, then piss off.
Hey there, it's me, your least favorite YouTuber, the Infuso. And as we all mourn the loss of Henry Cavill from the DC films, I thought maybe we could take a look back at his time in the role of Superman, as we set out to answer the question, is Henry Cavill the best Superman? And man, that cameo, it just hits different now, doesn't it? What at first looked to be a welcome comeback with a promising future has now become something that was tragically cut short in its prime, as the studios are going in a different direction. And while I definitely do have a lot of problems with Henry Cavill's time in the role, I have to admit, I'm more than a little bummed out that we're not going to see his return. And by the looks of Twitter, I'd say I'm not alone.
Why'd you show me the f***ing thing if I can't have it? No! 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 Poor f***ing Henry, man. Leaves f***ing Witcher to focus on Superman. This motherfucker is Superman, man.
To many, Henry Cavill was Superman. You gotta think, people have grown up with him being Superman. And on many levels, I think he was the perfect choice for the part. Aesthetically speaking, you really can't find a more perfect fit.
You won't.
Never once does he look like someone cosplaying. This isn't a guy in a Superman suit. You just look at this dude and you go, oh yeah, that's Superman. Like, this man looks plucked straight out of a comic book. I wouldn't be surprised to find that Henry Cavill himself was created by DC. I mean, seriously, look at him. Even without the suit, he still looks like several Superman action figures I owned as a kid. The likeness is evident, and if you don't want to take my word for it, then just ask my friend Reyes.
Henry Cavill is perfect.
I don't think so.
Henry
he's
Cavill not only looks like Superman facially,
he does look like Superman.
Not only looks like Superman built-wise.
Sure. I'll give you that. I grant you that.
I am convinced whenever that man's on screen that is Superman. I see him in that suit, cleanly shaved. Henry Cavill.
So you're going to have that impression.
It's perfect.
But if you look...
I really like the look of this Superman suit in these movies. It certainly has an otherworldly feel to it. Typically, the Superman suit can come off as a little bit cheesy, and a bit outdated. Whenever you see a parody of superheroes, this is almost always a look that you see somebody replicate. Objectively speaking, it's pretty silly. Big, colorful S, long red boots, underwear over the tights. It's an iconic look for sure.
But old, very old.
Just generally speaking, this isn't something that easily translates in a live-action adaptation. So I think the DCEU did a pretty good job of validating this look, while also taking reasonable liberties with it. It's a nice modernized update that sort of legitimizes the whole Superman getup. And when the camera's close enough to the character, you can see that there's Kryptonian writing and Hope emblems embedded into even the smallest fragment of the suit. I think the suit works well for the character, and well for the universe that these movies set up. It is undoubtedly one of my all-time favorite Superman suits. The constant changing Superman attires, while appreciated, as I think each one of these designs is pretty great in their own right, are never actually justified. The black and silver suit, while built up to, is never really explained. In the comics, Superman dons this suit following his Kryptonian coma. This allows him to absorb more energy from the sun at a faster rate, helping to heal him. A fact that's never stated, nor implied within this 4-hour film. The suit itself in the comics is almost symbolic of a time where Supes' attitude was still adjusting, and he was just a little bit more edgier than he normally had been. I mean, Superman returns from the dead pissed off, but then he gradually becomes more calm over time. arguably more calm than he was in the previous installment. So him wearing the suit now when he's at his most sensible does seem like a little bit of a mistake. But there is in fact a time where it would be ideal to see Superman in darker colors. Like during the nightmare sequences. It'd be really awesome to see evil Superman in the black and silver. But during those, he's just wearing his usual Superman suit. The darker suit would be welcome here, not because Superman is evil in the comics when he wears black, because that's not the case, but it would at least be a visual difference to distinguish between Superman at different points in the timeline. From a storytelling standpoint, typically a turn to the dark side includes a turn to the dark side of the wardrobe. If you were trying to take a pre-existing plot point and utilize it in a way beneficial to both appeasing an audience and furthering your narrative, I would think that this would be a smart alternate route to go. This is awesome fan service, but it misses the point. For as much as I like this design, and believe me, I am personally a fan, it does sort of remind me of Symbiote Spidey from Spider-Man 3, as it's a color swap of the character's cinematic design meant to reflect a more complex design made in the comics. And it's also the same exact color scheme. And it also doesn't help matters that these costume changes both take place in the third installment in their continuities. The more colorful version we see of the suit at the end of Black Adam sort of feels like a hybrid of the original Man of Steel design mixed with the original Superman 1978 design. And I appreciate this as well. It looks surprisingly good. But I think I appreciate the first initial design more because it seems like it has its own unique identity, and it's not instead just trying to replicate another's. I think it also helped this Superman stand out from the bunch. You know, there's been a lot of portrayals of the character over time, so it was nice that this one kind of got its own distinct look, because for the most part, in the past, they've almost all been the same. And the look of that suit felt like it was specifically geared for Cavill. As I've said before, I'm a fan of all of these suits, but I just wish there was a significance to these changes. Without rhyme or reason, it just makes the change feel like unnecessary fan service. And speaking of 1978 Superman, in taking a look back at Cavill's time in the Cape, I was shocked by how his time as the Red Blue Boy Scout kind of mirrored previous Superman, Christopher Reeve. For starters, there's the length of time that they played the part. Henry Cavill started in Man of Steel and left us in Black Adam. That's just under a decade of Henry Cavill as Superman. And interestingly enough, that's the same exact amount of time that Christopher Reeve was in the role. And yeah, sure, Henry Cavill has been on and off, but he still played the part in more movies than any other actor before him, appearing as a main character in 4 major superhero movies. Once again, just like Christopher Reeve did. Although I guess if you're counting both versions of Superman 2 as 2 separate movies entirely, technically Reeve has one over on him. Whereas in Henry Cavill's case, I kinda think you have to consider both versions of Justice League 2 separate entities, rather than an alternate take on the same thing. Which is also another similarity that these 2 Supermen have in common. Both played Superman in 2 very different variations of the same adaptation. Henry Cavill was in 2 versions of Batman v Superman. Dawn of Justice did have 2 separate versions of the movie made. They weren't really 2 different experiences. One was just more of the same experience. Although similarly, there were 2 versions of the original 1978 Superman movie, which are more of the same experience as well. Although Cavill does have a cameo at the end of another major superhero movie on his resume. Not to mention that Cavill's Superman did make appearances, sans the actor playing him. Once at the end of the movie Shazam, and then once again at the end of the first season of Peacemaker. While Christopher Reeve's Superman went on to get additional appearances in the CW versus Crisis on Infinite Earths and Superman Returns.
But not in that order.
This time being played by Brandon Routh. And even more interesting than that is that Henry Cavill had actually previously been turned down from the role of Superman in that very same Superman movie. Meaning that in an alternate reality, we could have seen Henry Cavill actually pick up the torch and play Christopher Reeve's Superman. Though in some ways, I suppose that we kinda did. More on that in just a second. The development of this line of films was notoriously rocky. And unfortunately, a lot of the performances in these movies are a testament to that.
However,
acting-wise, I think he performed the character to near perfection, which in no way, shape, or form could be an easy task, especially considering that the direction for the character was all over the place and a lot of the time conflicting. Regardless, Henry did everything that was asked of him, and he turned out something really special. This man just felt like Superman. He had a strong presence to him. His words carried weight. He spoke with the utmost confidence. He was articulate, he was intelligent, and he had a real charismatic charm to him. And despite all of this, he was still at times vulnerable. He was strong but not unbreakable, neither mentally nor physically. That's a lot to ask of an actor. But my boy Henry here was more than up for the challenge. He somehow managed to make Superman feel larger than life, but still down to earth at the same time. The tagline for the first Superman movie was, "You'll believe a man can fly." And I think Henry Cavill achieves just that. But he doesn't stop at flight. He makes you believe in all that he's doing. You believe that this man can fly, leap tall buildings in single bound, super punch an alien through a building. Whatever the fuck Superman does, you believe it when this guy does it. I don't think the movie ever managed to justify the disguise of Clark Kent. To be fair, that's one of the most challenging elements of the mythos, and I don't think many have done a lot to make it seem valid. There's no real explanation for how or why Clark Kent is undetectable to the world. It's one thing if you're saying that Superman soars through the airs and stays away from the public, but when they know his face well enough to slap it on a statue, the fact of the matter is that those glasses wouldn't be fooling anyone. Especially the so-called journalists that he works with on a daily basis. They never really had an alibi for that. And I'm genuinely shocked they didn't attempt to explain it away. What makes this even more goofy is when the movie for some reason emphasizes his dual identity, instead of attempting to ignore it. Like in moments where you have military officials asking this unmasked man why he won't give up his secret identity, even with Superman telling the general who is looking for him that he grew up on Kansas. Even with Lois blatantly calling Superman Clark in public. Still, everyone's clueless to this? Really? This is a hard part of the lore to establish for sure. It is the most blatantly dumb element of Superman that is almost impossible to realistically apply to a story in any sense of reality. But like they didn't even try. They could have attempted to write this off, or maybe not develop this aspect of the character. Maybe change it so that he alters his appearance in some other ways. I don't know. But they could have done something. Additionally strange is wondering what Clark Kent's return from the dead looked like. Because these movies never got a chance to address it. Superman's death was in the papers, and he comes back. He's an alien. People aren't going to bat an eye to that. But Clark Kent is supposed to be a man? So, what's his excuse?
Make it make sense.
Henry Cavill made Superman feel real. Everything about him in the role just felt genuine. Like as if all of it was just second nature and effortless. And while I will continue to go on and sing Henry's praises here, let me just say that while Henry Cavill was right for the character, the material wasn't always right for the character. The first Superman movie in this lineup did a lot to humanize the character. I feel like Man of Steel put more emphasis on man, and a little bit less emphasis on of steel. Because Superman felt no different than the rest of us. He was a flawed human being who just so happened to not be a human being at all. He was your everyday person, but gifted with immense power that he needed to use wisely. And try as he might, he wasn't always successful in that endeavor. Like most of us, Superman wasn't above being petty from time to time. I mean, he didn't go around picking fights, but he would find interesting ways of retaliating. And yet, despite Superman being occasionally extra, he still never abused his powers. He has strength that could easily kill, let alone hurt somebody. And while he did on occasion act out of revenge, he did still show incredible mental strength in honing his power and holding back. He made sure not to hurt the civilization around him. But once again, he isn't prone to letting out some angst or frustration, like I think a lot of people would had they been gifted these powers. And that's what I love about Man of Steel. This Superman isn't above getting even. He's not going to kill you or anything, but he will inconvenience you in a major way. Because despite the immense training and conditioning he's been through, he's not perfection. He's just a person. Because this isn't the heroic do-gooder that we're used to. He's not the red-blue Boy Scout just yet. He's just a guy who happens to be able to fly. A good guy trying to do the right thing. And on occasion, failing along the way. I really enjoy Man of Steel as a starting point for this character. And while I may not be a Zack Snyder fanboy, I do think this movie was kind of brilliant in that way. I always believed the initial goal was to watch Superman grow into the legend that he's meant to be. That with time, experience, and learned lessons, we'd see him mature into the iconic force of good that we all know him to be. And if that was the purpose of this characterization, and that was the direction these films had taken, oh man, no question, I would have been on board. Sign me up for 3 more sequels, I'm in. Unfortunately, that wasn't the route that was taken. Instead of advancing Superman along the way, progressing him into the character that he's meant to be, this cinematic universe just forced him into that narrative destination. But we'll get into that in a minute. Creatively speaking, I think the more flawed Superman lends some credibility to the later nightmare sequences that are used. Superman's reign of power and destruction seems like it could potentially be in the cards here when Superman isn't viewed under an angelic light. He doesn't have darkness in his soul, but he does have the potential to have that very soul crushed, and then consumed by darkness, or dark side. You see what I did there?
No.
If this was all to build toward evil Overlord Superman, I think that there's a solid breadcrumb trail set down to lead into a live-action Injustice remake. While there were choices that were made in this film that I sorta hate, like having Superman willingly destroy Krypton's only hope of regeneration just to get one over on Zod, and then justifying it with Krypton had its chance! Yeah, I don't know, man. I'd like to think Superman would have a lot more empathy than that. He wouldn't hold an entire potential population accountable for one war-hungry Kryptonian's actions. Especially considering that he himself is Kryptonian. Superman destroys Krypton's hope, which is clearly counterproductive to the core nature of the character, as he wears the symbol of hope on his chest at all times. While Superman is Earth's self-appointed protector, I don't think his love of Earth should come at the expense of his home planet. The guy would be more compassionate than that. I don't think he'd willfully put the remnants of a planet in danger. This doesn't really seem like Superman's MO. Now contrast that to the comics, where Superman puts himself in danger to save a shrunken, bottled Kryptonian city. This moment usually gets brushed past and glossed over in favor of talking about him snapping Zod's neck at the end. For me personally, I think this was a much bigger misstep, as it makes Superman look impulsive and careless, which are 2 qualities polar opposite to the hero. Regardless of all else, Man of Steel felt like an event. Henry put on a career-changing performance, and the future looked incredibly bright. The movie was nearly monumental. It's a mostly well-crafted story that works as a ground zero both for the character of Superman and for the cinematic universe that it's creating. It feels like a fully fleshed out, well-thought-out story about Superman. It is the perfect starting point. The next installment in this universe was Dawn of Justice, a movie which saw the first ever Batman-Superman clash. I can't say the depiction of his character is much different here. He does feel slightly more mature following the events of the first movie, but the character is still written to be the same character. It felt like a nudge in the right direction while still feeling like a natural progression. He's still a little bit vengeance-driven and angsty for your standard Superman performance, but he does feel more mature and noble now. And he tries to reason with an even more angsty and vengeance-driven Batman. His good deeds aren't shown, but they are at least mentioned in passing.
The Daily Planet criticizing those who think they're above the laws. A little hypocritical. Every time your hero saves a cat out of a tree, you write a puff piece editorial.
So long now. Most of the world doesn't share your opinion, Mr. Wayne.
There are some things in this I do question, though. The monument made in his likeness does seem a little bit off. This isn't a Superman who's been saving lives for decades. This is a Superman who saved the city once from attackers from his home planet who were really just there looking for him. I would think that some people see Superman as being at fault for that attack. Now, I'm not saying those people would be right, but I do think there's a conversation to be had there. So the way that they're portraying Superman as the great savior, I don't know if it's a jump the shark moment, but it's definitely a jump the gun moment. I don't know, I kind of feel like this is way too early in his career for this big of a tribute. Like, a statue alone is excessive, but a giant monument? The Dark Knight's Batman seemingly sacrificed himself saving the whole city, and he got this rinky-dink marble life-size version of himself made. See, now that makes sense to me. That's justified. This?
No,
not Superman.
Where I really start to fall off here is right after the first movie. Because while it does seem like Superman is transitioning and learning to be the legend, these movies seem to proclaim that he already is. And I don't know, for where the story starts and where it ends, it doesn't feel like he's there yet. Don't get me wrong, he's on his way, but he's not there yet. What really drives me crazy here is that they were so close to that making sense for the story. Like, everything I just said about Batman at the end of The Dark Knight Rises is almost verbatim what happens here at the end of Batman v Superman. At the very end, we see Superman's true selfless nature, as he sacrifices himself to take out Doomsday and ensure the safety of a city. That is almost the same exact ending. See, had such a sculpture been made at the end of this movie or the beginning of the next one, having been made post-Superman as an homage to his heroic deeds, I think that would mean more, and it would feel more natural. Had he died a martyr, I think a giant sculpture in his image would be much more fitting. I also wish we could have seen more of Superman's involvement with Metropolis. It would have been nice to see him interact with citizens more often, just to give us a better idea of the relationship that he has with the city. Now, there is a montage that sort of accomplishes this. Actually, I think it does a lot to further illustrate Superman's relationship with the entire world, but it's just sort of this one moment, and then it's gone. As opposed to feeling like a continual thing, it's something that happens at this period of time, and then we're moving on. I think these were plot points that really should have been explored in a sequel to Man of Steel. But the new additions of Batman, Wonder Woman, Lex Luthor, and a bunch of other cameos kinda made that impossible to be developed. There's a whole lot of characters here, and there's a whole lot going on with each of them. To my knowledge, that was a studio-mandated decision, and not a Zack Snyder one, so, take that for what it's worth. And speaking of jumping the gun, killing Superman off in the second movie that he's in? Excuse me? Superman dying in the comics was such a huge moment because everybody knew who Superman was. Everybody in all of Metropolis, in all of the DC universe, hell, everyone out here in the real world knew who Superman was. So many generations had grown up with the character. He had left behind a legacy that was unrivaled. Superman meant so much to so many, both in fact and fiction. And what made the moment Superman died so heartbreaking was watching a beloved icon take his last breath. This man who had a multiple-decade run, acting as this great symbol of hope, had died. So it caused a lot of people to wonder if hope itself died with him. It was such a huge, impactful moment, because this was a fully realized Superman. But the Superman from the films, once again, was not that. Not yet, anyway. He was on the path to becoming that Superman, but his journey was very tragically cut short. And this decision is kind of the big problem I have with all of the DCEU, but especially Superman's journey in this line of films. It speeds through it. What should be major moments feel significantly more minor as they're done in passing. It feels like a lot of the references that were made, the story beats that were taken from the original stories, were done as a way of fan service. Look, it's that thing that you know, isn't it great? No, it's not. It's almost like taking a moment in a story at face value without understanding the context of that story itself. I want you to remember that these movies deprived us of seeing Superman's casket carried by his closest friends and family. The heroes that he spent time with, teamed up with, and inspired, all side by side in unison, mourning the death of an icon. That would have been an incredible moment to see put on film. As a matter of fact, that moment is tailor-made for a movie. And yet this movie found itself unable to duplicate it because it killed off Superman not only before they developed all these other heroes, but before they developed Superman himself. While having Superman die to save others is definitely a huge leap in the right direction for the character, it was still way too soon. What should be a major moment is undercut by the fact that the character is dying in his second ever outing. After his first meeting with Batman, Wonder Woman, and Lex Luthor, he just dies. That's it. Another problem here is that nobody actually believed that he was dead, because he wasn't. This is a little bit too early to run a Death of Superman story when the Superman cinematically was just conceptually created. This just didn't have the impact that it should have, which is similar to how I feel about Batman v Superman overall. Now, where the character really sees a complete shift is in the movie Justice League. Following Superman's death, there's this weird revisionist history. There's a lot of emphasis put on his overall legacy, and it feels so incredibly forced. He's remembered and spoken of in death as the way Superman is spoken of in real life. He's treated as if he was mankind's savior. The world acts as if they lost a messiah. And while I do like this arc, again, it all feels a little bit too premature. Did Superman really do anything deity-worthy? Especially when you consider that this universe establishes that there's already a bunch of powered people and costumed crusaders.
Pause. Editor's note. While Superman would undoubtedly be remembered and honored for his sacrifice, I think it would be a little bit too early into his hero run for him to be mourned as if it was the end of the Second Coming. I'm sorry for the robot voice. Pretend I'm Brainiac.
Unpause.
Unpause.
Not only does the world mourn a savior, but they treat him as if he was a good-hearted god. And the movie kind of gaslights its audience into believing that legacy. It's very fictitious. It doesn't at all feel real. Especially with that cell phone video opening. This Superman is a lot more accessible and approachable than he had previously been. And yet this isn't the next step in the character's story, because that story has allegedly come to an end. He's shown to be an overly kind man of the people. And look, I get it. That is Superman. But that hasn't been these movies' Superman. Now this is in no way, shape, or form a critique on the way Henry Cavill portrayed this side of Superman. Because in all actuality, I actually think he did a pretty great job at this as well. Once again, he rose to the challenge. He was very believable as this version of Superman. But this version of Superman wasn't very believable as being the Superman that we'd already seen. He came off as holier-than-thou, but not to the point of preachy annoyance. He's humble, he's earnest, he's the humanoid embodiment of justice. Metropolis's golden boy, all that is good and righteous in the world. Despite how outlandish it is to think of a person being so pure, Cavill never came off as anything but legitimate. In placement of his strictly serious tone was a much more friendly, lighthearted take on the character. One that loses his edge entirely. And because of that, it stands out that much more. It sort of creates this giant inconsistency with Superman. Because now, without rhyme or reason, he's just changed. He's completely different. He's a completely different character. And it's hard to critique this because while it is spot on for the character of the comics and the character the public knows, it is not the same character that we've seen in the previous movies. His primary mission to protect others is definitely highlighted here. There's scenes where Superman stops mid-fight to go and save others. And yeah, that's what Superman does. This is an obvious deviation from what came before. Which is why if you watch Zack Snyder's Justice League, the character still feels perfectly in tune with the one that was already established. Where in Joss Whedon's Justice League, the character feels more like a Christopher Reeve tribute act. Which, to be fair, is not an insult by any means. Most people feel that Reeves was the embodiment of Superman, so he's certainly not the worst person to be influenced by or take inspiration from. However, in the Whedon cut of the film, a lot of his performance is heavily weighed down by bad CGI, as effects were used to cover up the fact that Cavill currently had a mustache. While the effect succeeds in covering his lip brow, it also unfortunately covers up whatever emotion it is he's trying to convey. Despite all of this, I really like the direction the character was taken in. I just wish it would have made more sense as to why he suddenly made that transition. Because it's also this version of the character that shows up in future installments. And without cause or justification, it just feels like Joss Whedon soft rebooted the character. Alternatively, the Snyder Cut very clearly handled the character much better. His characterization made sense to what was already established, and it seemed like he was subtly being nudged to becoming the ultimate symbol of good. But it was also still setting up that the ultimate symbol of good would one day go bad, so... you know, a little bit of mixed messages there, but compelling storytelling nonetheless. Henry excelled at playing this version of Superman, so much so that it honestly makes you wonder why this wasn't always the direction. It was refreshing seeing Superman return to the status quo and act like the man of tomorrow. My only issue with it is that the transition there was non-existent. It's like one day he's 90s Superman, and then the next minute he's reimagined as 70s Superman. Like, pick a lane. Or at least turn on your blinkers when switching lanes. Like, I'm getting whiplash here. You can't just shift and change course without any explanation. I think this only becomes more painfully obvious over time with these films. The fact that this Superman had his own unique theme and sound, and then it was just suddenly changed to the iconic John Williams Superman theme, that should speak volumes. It's symbolic of them taking everything original about this Superman and then just trading it in for a factory reset. Again, I must emphasize that the problem wasn't Henry Cavill playing the part. It's how this part was prepared for Henry Cavill. Without a fluid sequence of events and continued evolution, the character just feels changed. I think things like this rob the cinematic universe of its legitimacy in character development. Instead of patiently allowing this Superman to grow into the part, it's now just insisted upon. Well, yeah, this is Superman. He's always been like this. What are you talking about? Whether it be creative blurred vision or studio interference, at times this Superman could come off as completely directionless. The blueprint of this character's soul is mostly lost in translation. It's very clear to me that the Superman presented post-Batman v Superman is not in fact the same one presented pre-Justice League. I think what's truly unjustifiable, though, is that in nearly a decade's worth of films, hardly any worthwhile dynamics were built up between Superman and the world that surrounds him. Major plot points in the character's identity are either rushed or completely non-existent. His relationship with Lois never feels authentic. It feels creatively mandated. I mean, it doesn't feel totally forced, but like Superman itself, it feels like it moves at the speed of light. Wait, does Superman move at the speed of light? I can maybe see these two characters being interested in each other, but I don't think we really see what makes their connection so strong. I know these aren't romance movies by any means, but the original Superman movies managed to create an incredible romance between Clark and Lois. And this one created this.
You know, they say it's all downhill after the first kiss.
Are you sure I'll be careful kissing you?
Oh yeah, that's good stuff. While I do think that Amy Adams made a good Lois Lane and Henry Cavill made a good Superman, I don't feel like the two together made for a good Lois and Clark. They just didn't have the chemistry you'd hope for in this type of dynamic. And it seems to dissipate as time goes on. I buy the two having an interest in each other, but their undeniable love is actually quite deniable. I mean, by the end of the second movie, Superman's about to pop the question. Y'all only got together at the end of the last movie. You would think that we'd have more time to see what their actual relationship entails, or what their dynamic looks like, but no, not really. That's a huge issue I have with the DCEU films. They didn't seem to want to take their time and establish things. They just wanted to get straight to the point. And because of this, a lot of what they were creating ultimately felt very soulless. It'd be like instead of reading a book, you looked up the Spark Notes and then just said that you read the book. It's not the same. It may summarize the same story beats, but you're not getting the actual experience. These are just shallow reimaginings of legendary moments. Moments that are all style and no substance. Imagery that looks cool, but unfortunately has no depth. I'm a fan of the way they portray the Kents. They're not endless fountains of sage advice, but they try to be. Clark's father tries to wisen him up, tries to guide him down the right path, but he doesn't always have the answer. Sometimes he says these profound things that mean a lot to Clark, that he keeps with him in the long run. But other times he's shrugging his shoulders and trying to make it up as he goes along. Snyder really presented an imperfect representation of the Kents, and in doing so created authentic feeling characters. They aren't the picture-perfect people they are in the comics, but you can tell that they're trying their best to be. Clark's relationship with his father is really well crafted. If I had one complaint, it's that Cavill and Costner don't often share the screen together, as their relationship plays out in a series of flashbacks with younger actors playing Clark. I do think Papa Kent kinda overstays his welcome, as these movies feel the need to just shoehorn him into things that he just does not need to be involved in. Like, the guy's dead. Just let him rest in peace. They don't do as much to develop Clark's relationship with his mother, but they kind of double down on the strength of that bond anyway. Clark is super protective over his Earth mother, but I feel like that plot point is a little too emphasized, and it ultimately makes Superman look like a violent, angry mama's boy. It's not the worst aspect of these movies, but I'm just in awe at how they managed to both do too much and then too little with this dynamic at the same time. Superman and his arch enemy Lex Luthor come off as awkward strangers. Their feud seems entirely one-sided, and I know that their rivalry is always built on Lex's obsession and his hatred of having someone more powerful than he is, but here, that's all there is to it. I also don't think that Jesse Eisenberg and Henry Cavill worked well off each other. And maybe that's in part due to a poor depiction of Lex Luthor overall, but it's yet another case of them casting somebody their main actor has no chemistry with. Like, did you just not do screen tests? I don't understand. The first time you put these two in a room together, someone should have said, alright, maybe we should rethink this. Lex and Superman's interactions always felt incredibly forced. And if I'm being honest, just plain goofy. This is Superman and Lex Luthor we're talking about. Where is the animosity brought on by closeted envy? The clash of two separate personalities with two different types of power. They replaced all of that with a blatantly upfront jealous nerd who has a god complex. Why is Lex Luthor quirky? It's like Zooey Deschanel playing a villain. I didn't ask for this, nor would I ever. I don't know who would. Jimmy Olsen isn't even really a factor in any of this, as he never even meets Clark before he ends up dead. But the biggest crime out of all of this is that Superman's relationship with the rest of the Justice League members is nearly non-existent. He and Wonder Woman are acquainted, I guess. That's really all you could say for it. They briefly met, but it's mostly Bruce that interacted with her. Which I'm not going to complain too much about because, very often Bruce and Diana are depicted as being a thing. I mean, so are Superman and Wonder Woman from time to time, but whatever. I'm not really losing sleep that they didn't do that dynamic. I'm not a huge fan of that one either. He kind of just saw Aquaman, and depending on which version of Justice League you watch, he once shared a laugh with Cyborg. Oh, and he took a couple swings at Barry. But, I mean, who amongst us hasn't wanted to do that in these movies? These movies play it off like there's established friendships here, but there really, really isn't. These characters don't get to realistically form bonds and get to know each other, yet these movies protest they do. And the way all these characters speak about him in death as if they knew him in life feels extremely artificial. And then that's only further set in stone after his rebirth, where all of a sudden they're all just buddy-buddy with a complete stranger. These movies deprived us of seeing Superman have the admiration of his peers, seeing him work as a co-leader of DC's finest assembly of heroes. They failed to translate the interesting relationships that these characters have from the comics. The exception to all of this is, of course, Superman and Batman. I think these two heroes play incredibly well off each other. Their relationship feels ripped straight out of the comics, a friendship that's born out of respect following conflict. In this universe, I think we get the best scenes of both Batman and Superman when they're interacting with each other. Some of the most memorable moments in all of this cinematic universe are having these two characters go back and forth. Their conflict, their conversations. I just wish there was more of that because Ben Affleck and Henry Cavill actually have a lot of chemistry. On the subject of memorable moments, what should not, and quite frankly cannot be understated, is all the incredible firsts that came from Henry Cavill's time in the role. All the iconic moments from the comics that he got to recreate on the big screen. Facing off against the Dark Knight, racing the Flash, becoming a founding member of the Justice League, dying in a heroic sacrifice, rising from the dead, donning the famous 90s black suit. There is no other on-screen Superman that can lay claim to doing half of what this Superman did. Though I will admit Tom Welling is pretty close, and his time in space pajamas has left quite the impression. When you're talking about the great Superman performances, his name will inevitably come up. But what's really surprising to me is that he truly only got to be the primary character in one outing. In Man of Steel, he was the star of the show, but in Batman v Superman, he was secondary to the first appearance of the Caped Crusader, and also a little overshadowed toward the end with the emergence of Wonder Woman. While he does become the focal point when he selflessly sacrifices himself to stop Doomsday, means he's taken out of most of Justice League, both versions, which instead sees the character become the plot point the movie's building up to. And then finally in Black Adam, he reappears as the character in what is, as of right now, looking like his last appearance. For all the time that was given to him, there wasn't as much screen time as you'd hope this symbol of hope would get. Ultimately, was Henry Cavill my favorite Superman? No. But I really think he had the potential to be. Had he been written a little bit better, or at least more consistent, I'd probably put him as number 1 or 2. Because the truth of the matter is, Henry Cavill played 2 entirely different versions of Superman. And he played both of them incredibly. I just wish there was a proper progression from man who is super to Superman. The issues I have with the character's depiction aren't at all on the actor. They're on the constant creative gears shifting as those in charge were swapped in and out. Regardless, Henry Cavill's time in the role will always be remembered and should always be respected. His performance should be celebrated as being great even when what he was given to work with wasn't. A part of me wishes that we got to see another movie with Cavill as the character, this time being the focal point in his own story. Considering that we only got him as the main attraction when he was broody Superman, it would have been nice to have a send-off for the Man of Tomorrow as the main attraction, with him acting as the classic Superman. However, another part of me thinks that maybe too much damage was done creatively, and maybe a clean slate would be for the better. I don't know, I guess you could say I'm of two minds on the subject. I hold out hope that the Man of Tomorrow will have another tomorrow. With the way that superhero movie lore exists now, or former iconic superhero actors returning to their roles through the means of alternate universes and timeline shifts, I think it stands to reason that this might not be the last time we see him as Superman.
I promise it will be rewarded.
With all that being said, if you like this video and would be interested in seeing a video about the 2 separate versions of Justice League, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
Superman was born Superman.
I was your least favorite YouTuber, Infuso, and I thank you for watching. Hope to see you in the next one.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.